My name is Mark Rains. I am a television and film production teacher in high school, and when I'm not teaching, I share my fitness journey online as California Thor. I actually came out of industry. I was a reporter and anchor and had never taught in a classroom before. So very early on, I needed teachers to tell me what to do, as simple things as taking roll, how to do lesson plans, things like that. A really important teacher for me was Sally Latham, who was another teacher at my school. And then as years went by, I've had great administrators and other teachers who really have helped me become the best teacher I can be. And I learned early on, it really does take a whole community of people to help students succeed. I was actually trying to learn how to use Instagram in the fall of 2014. It was still fairly new, and I was wanting to incorporate it more into my classroom and with my students and their media productions. And late one night in November, I was just researching, how do you start a page? How do you grow a page? What does it look like to engage with followers? And I kind of came along the lines of, you need a focus. And so for me, my focuses became weightlifting and fitness, bodybuilding in general, superheroes and comics, which I'm a big fan of, the movies especially, and then also tattoos. I have a fairly large lion tattoo on my side, and so all of those things became sort of the kinds of things I was posting, and I don't know, California Thor just seemed right. I have the long hair. People often referred to me as Thor. I had dressed up as Thor a few times for Halloween. And then I saw that the Instagram title was available with an underscore in between California and Thor, and so it is what it is. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just put it out there and started kind of learning how to post, what to post, how to engage with folks. Yeah, so I've been teaching now for over 20 years, and before that I was a television anchor and reporter for local TV. I worked in Florida, Missouri, Alabama. The thing about starting out in television news is you have to go where the jobs are, and so I went wherever they were willing to hire me. And I worked on everything from crime, courts, tornadoes, lots of homicides, just the really serious, hard news. There were definitely times where I get to tell fun stories and good positive stories too, and I kind of fought for that a lot. But mostly, television news is a lot of serious, hardcore topics. And I did that for almost 10 years. Yeah, I think it was pretty courageous to leave television and become a teacher basically overnight with very little training. And from there, I have built 3 award-winning high school television and film programs, and I'm in the middle of building a 4th one that's already won some awards. And in the midst of my teaching career, I've just had some really difficult personal struggles. In 2010, kind of at the turn of 2010 to 2011, I was on my winter break visiting my parents, and my speech started to change. I was struggling to come up with words and to speak sort of out of nowhere, and it continued to get a little worse and worse, and I went back to work, and it was getting worse, and I was having trouble speaking in class in front of my students to even, do my job. And eventually it took a year going to multiple doctors. I was in speech therapy for 5 or 6 months, and it was that kind of thing where I had the words in my head, but I couldn't get them out. And no one really knew what happened. It was a stutter, and so the words could come out, but not fluid. And so I had gone from being a public speaker as a profession in television and then as a teacher, and I even spoke at a lot of conferences and teachers' conferences for years. And then I was at a point where it was hard to even talk in class. It was hard to talk one-on-one with someone. It was hard to leave a voicemail because the words just came out haltingly. It was definitely a speech impediment, a stutter, and it was extremely frustrating, especially being someone who had always been really a professional speaker in all aspects. Before that started, I had been sick for about 6 months with different lung infections and bronchial type issues. It turned out there was mold in the home that I was living in, and so I had been sick on and off for about 6 months, and I had been on a lot of like inhalers and medications and things. So initially, the doctors thought that maybe it was some sort of reaction to all of that. And so at first it was like, let's see if this sort of, once this all gets out of your system, maybe things will straighten out. But it didn't. There were, I saw a lot of neurologists, and most of them were stumped. And I changed primary care doctors a couple of times, kept trying to find what this could be. And finally, a neurologist tried Parkinson's medication for me. And I don't have any other symptoms of Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is one of those things where they really rely on symptoms to know if someone is becoming or has the disease of Parkinson's. And I didn't have any other symptoms. The only thing that I had was the speech impediment. And normally speech is a later component of Parkinson's. And so, but this neurologist thought that maybe if she tried Parkinson's medication, that your speech is controlled in the same area of your brain where there is a dopamine deficiency if you have Parkinson's. And the medication she put me on helps develop dopamine in the brain. And so it was within 7 days after she started me on Parkinson's medication that my speech became fluid again. And that was in 2011, and I have been on that medication daily since then. And it continues to keep my speech fluid most of the time. When it first started to correct or be corrected, I thought it was clearing up, but I was kind of scared to say anything or...
You don't want to jinx it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, is this happening? Is it getting better? And and then my friends were noticing. And I think actually the lady who cuts my hair was the first person to go, hey, well, your speech is clear. And I was like, yeah, I think it is.
What was the word? Do you remember the sentence?
No, I don't. I know that, I had gotten to a point where I wasn't really talking unless it was necessary because it was so exhausting to constantly have to struggle to speak. And so it really did change my life in that I became a lot more careful about when and how I spoke and whether it was worth it or not, because it was exhausting. And so it was so liberating to not have those kind of feelings after that point. The downside is the Parkinson's medication for me and for a lot of people on it tends to mess with your sleep patterns or cause you to be sleepy. And so I have had difficulty with sleep and being tired and things like that ever since I've been on Parkinson's medication. So I wake up at all different times of the night. I'm tired when I shouldn't be tired, and that's been a huge life adjustment for me. But to me, the ability to speak and not have to struggle to speak is way more important than the side effects of the medication. Well, no, and I actually started writing more at that time because I was like, okay, it's hard to talk about this. People keep asking me about it. And San Diego is such a sort of transient community. I was seeing different people at different times. And so I was having to keep telling the story to new people who knew me and were surprised that I sounded different. And so I actually started blogging about it online so that I could say, hey, you can read this. And so my skills at writing actually really came in handy. And I was like, okay, if I can't communicate as well verbally, I can go to writing. And that was super helpful. As far as performing my job and teaching every day, I had guest artists, and my principal allowed them to come in more, guest teaching artists. People from the industry who know the art area that I teach came in and helped teach my classes. They were already there. My principal just made it possible for them to be there more during that time. I was also having students help teach more, the upper level students teaching the introductory students. And so, and my coworkers were being super helpful in covering my class because I was leaving a lot for doctor's appointments, and I was starting to run out of leave because I was having to leave so often for medical appointments. And so I really did have this community at my school that stepped up to help me. And then personally, I had the community here in San Diego of my friends and my church, and then my family across country were all super supportive of me as well. Yeah, I think that because of my early years as a teacher and realizing how much I needed the other teachers around me and how much I needed my students even to help, that built this mindset of me of building a community around my classroom for sure. And then outside of school, community has always been super important to me. It's really something that my parents modeled. We were a military family, so we moved every 2 to 3 years, and we never lived close to our extended family. And so our extended family in different states were the people who lived next to us and the people who my parents knew through their work. And so they really did model the importance of having those people in your life and a church family who can really step up to help you when your blood family maybe can't. I was in a unique position where my students and I helped with production of TEDx Youth at San Diego for several years. And they had heard of my story, and I pitched a talk to them. And I had had such a unique opportunity in my classroom to share my experience with them in real time. They saw me struggle. They saw me fighting to speak on a daily basis. And I was pretty open with them about what was going on, what I needed from them, how they could help me. And once I got over the initial shock, I realized I needed them. And but I realized that the opportunity to share at them at the depth that I could in a TED Talk about how this personally impacted me and what I learned through this struggle could be something that would be that next level of teaching that I could provide. A mentor of mine in ministry had said the phrase, "Sometimes the teacher becomes the lesson." And I had really experienced that during that time. It's like, as much as I was teaching them about film and television production, I was teaching them so much more about perseverance and courage and struggles and how to overcome, and to put that into a talk that would be even more detailed of what I went through, what I learned from that for my current students, but also for my past students. And it was broadcast live on the internet to students around the world. And so I couldn't think of a better way to turn something that had been really awful for me into a really big positive. It was really helpful to get me back on stage. When I gave my first TEDx talk, I had not spoken in public outside of my classroom in 3 years. And that had gone from me speaking regularly at events and special engagements and teacher conferences and things like that to only talking in my classroom, and then mainly talking to like small groups of my friends. And so it was a big act of courage for me to get on that stage and to be vulnerable in front of all of those teenagers. My students were running the cameras that were filming that event. And I told them things that I had not said to them before in school, and most teachers probably wouldn't share in school. It was a certain level of vulnerability that I had not experienced before, and I saw how impactful that was. I heard from so many current students, former students, and young people and adults around the world about how helpful it was for them to hear what the struggle was like for me and how I overcame it. Yeah, and the second hardest thing was, so when I gave that TEDx talk it was in November of 2013. I flew the next day to North Carolina to be with my mom, who had just been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. It's really hard, and family to me has been everything. As family and faith and community. and to go from I just survived this thing and my parents were really there for me and helped see me through it, and then to literally turn and then the reverse, that I'm in that position for them. To give this talk on one day and the next day be on a flight to go see my mom go into her first surgery for cancer, was it's insane. It just seemed really, really like such a. The good thing is I learned so much through my experience with managing the medical community and my own care and fighting for my own care and those kind of things that really helped me long term with my parents. And also that empathy that I talked about earlier, and also realizing I need to ask people for help. Because that journey with my mom's cancer started in 2013, and she lived almost 7 years with stage 3 ovarian cancer. In 2018, I moved across country. My parents lived in North Carolina. They had retired there. They were both from North Carolina. I had never lived there because of our military background, but I had gone to be with them there for years and years and years for my vacations, all my breaks that I could. And so I went home to move in with them for a year to help my dad care for my mom while she continued to fight cancer. And my dad unexpectedly, he had some routine heart surgery and unexpectedly became in critical condition and had to fight for his life for, he was in the hospital a total of 6 weeks. And the hospital was like an hour away from my parents, and my mom and I were driving back and forth every day. She was still weak from cancer treatments, and he passed away. And it was completely unexpected. There was not a plan for my mom, because she had had this terminal cancer for so long that she had been overcoming. Ultimately, we had been told it was incurable. She would die of this cancer. But there wasn't a plan for it if my dad passed away first, because we did not expect that at all. And so I have an older brother. He has a family. I have never been married. My parents were still my nuclear family. I love my life and job here in San Diego, but my parents are more important. And so I went on another year of personal leave and stayed and cared for my mom full time for the year after my dad died. And it was extremely hard. The second part of that time was during the height of the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And so I was caring for someone that represented the two communities that were most vulnerable for COVID. She was immune compromised, and she was a senior citizen, and no one knew what was going on. And she had just started a chemotherapy again for her cancer. And then my mom passed away in June 2020 after I had been caring for her that year. And then I sort of got stranded in my parents' home for about a year before I could get back and get another job here in San Diego in 2021. My parents lived there about 25 years. And before that, they had moved every 2 to 3 years. And that was the first place that they sort of, put in roots. They lived on a lake in the Smoky Mountains in a really small town. It was about an hour away from a big city, 30 to 45 minutes away from sort of a medium-sized city, but kind of nestled in the Smoky Mountains out in the middle of nowhere. And that's where I was for a year. Most of my extended family lives in North Carolina, but I wasn't able to see much of them during that time. So I was in my parents' home in a really beautiful location. I couldn't get food delivered. It's too far from town. My extended family and community at large really sort of saved my, being at that time, as far as people called me. I talked to people on the phone. I ended up doing 2 online Bible studies because one of the things that happened during COVID is that people started to have their Bible studies online. So I joined in with 2 San Diego groups online for Bible study while I was sort of stranded in North Carolina. One of those Bible studies I'm still in now. And, it just really kept me going, having the support when people couldn't be in person and when people couldn't be together around the world. I still had some of that community that I had built, talking to me on the phone, doing Zooms, FaceTime, things like that, and it really did help me survive that time. Yeah, I'd say the biggest commonality in these experiences, my speech struggle, and then the situation I found myself in with both of my parents, and then caring for my mom mostly by myself for a year, is that I could not have done what I did without my faith and without God being there for me, and my belief system. On my tattoo is the scripture Ephesians 1:1-14. It's a fairly large lion, and the lion represents God to me, the character Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia. And then the scripture is kind of a long segment, Ephesians 1:1-14, and it's not written out on the tattoo, it's just the location. But in that scripture, you can go through and underline everything that God or Christ says we are. And it's things like loved, blessed, redeemed, adopted. And it's just a constant reminder to me that I have all that in me and that God is there with me. And he was with me when I couldn't speak. And he was with me when I was in the hospital with both of my parents struggling to live. He was with me when I was in that house alone in the middle of practically nowhere, at least from my experience of places I've lived. He was there, and it was hard, and it was not something I ever would have chosen, to be alone in a global pandemic in the middle of nowhere in my parents' home. But I survived because God was there with me. I think for me, and something that I often tell young people, is that my favorite thing about getting older is perspective, is to be able to look back at my timeline and see all the times that I've made it through different things. And in my mind, all the times that God carried me through situations. And so even in the many crisis situations I was with my dad and with my mom during that year, when my dad was struggling for a short time and then my mom nearly died multiple times in my care. And all of that, I could pause and go, God's here. I know he's here. He was there. He helped me through this. He's going to help me through this right now. And having the perspective of looking back and seeing my extended journey and how I've persevered through things with God's help, with my family's help, with community around me, really does help me in those moments where I'm not sure how I'm going to get through that moment. I have enjoyed teaching for over 20 years. I'm not sure how much longer I'll teach. I love mentoring teenagers. I love the impact I've been able to have on young people and how I've been able to encourage them, help them find a passion or a career, but even more so, teaching them things by example, just from my own personal stories. When I started at this new school here, the first thing I told them was, I know that they just came out of COVID too. They were back in classroom for the first time in a year, and I hadn't been in 3. And so, I told them where I was, what happened to me, how both of my parents died, what I had experienced and what I was experiencing now coming back to the profession. And so I love that opportunity that when it's right, when it's necessary, and when it's helpful, that I can share my vulnerability with young people and part of my story to help them persevere in their stories. And so I love that. What that looks like long term, I'm not sure. I've been doing it a long time. I love the role I've been able to have online in encouraging people in their fitness journey. One of the things that happened for me with the Parkinson's medication is because it was messing with my sleep patterns and waking me up at all hours of the night. It really, I had worked out since I was in my 20s, but I discovered that if I would go to the gym first thing in the morning, it gave me an adrenaline boost that would get me through to lunch. And I was like, okay, this is how I survive. This is how I keep going. As I get up, I'm awake every morning, whether I want to be or not, early. So I started going to the gym every day. And since then, unless it's been physically impossible during the times when I was caring for my mom, I have exercised in some way almost every day since 2012. And I love that, and I love encouraging other people in that. I it's I often say that it's faith, family, and fitness that keeps me going, and I think that's pretty accurate. Right now, I do cardio first thing in the morning, and then I do weights after school whenever possible, and it does really help my body, mind, and spirit, along with everything else I'm doing. So my phrase that I have used a lot on social media is never give up. And for my mom, um, I never saw her quit, and she didn't have a particular phrase, but it was how she carried herself and how she persevered. And then I saw my dad do the same thing when he was in cardiovascular ICU for 5 weeks. He didn't quit, and to their very last breaths, both of them, they fought for me, I think.
I think they did. And
But they also just really loved our family and their friends, and they never gave up, and that is probably that and the faith they introduced me to as a child that is still part of my life today are the biggest impact they've had on me.